In the early 1990s, the American media apparatus weaponized a new kind of narrative. Broadcast networks and tabloid news programs rushed to categorize Aileen Wuornos as the nation's first high-profile female serial killer. Beneath that heavy media caricature was a woman whose specific life history was rapidly being buried under the weight of a national sensation. Away from the studio lights, the geographic reality was stark. Between 1989 and 1990, the bodies of 7 men were discovered along the margins of Florida's highway system. While the public consumed the image of a cold-blooded predator, Wuornos herself told a different story. She consistently claimed the men she killed had violently assaulted her, and that her actions were desperate moves to survive. Reconciling this media-driven myth with the complex legal reality of a vulnerable woman is the starting point for understanding how this case actually unfolded. The environment for these crimes was the sprawling, anonymous network of the Florida highway system, a transient world that served as the backdrop for Wuornos's life and the eventual murders. Having lived on the fringes for years, Wuornos survived as a sex worker along these interchanges, a position that left her exposed to severe socioeconomic and physical vulnerabilities. Deaths began in late 1989. As 1990 progressed, the killings accelerated, with the final 3 victims found within weeks. This frequency and consistent forensic pattern allowed law enforcement to link the 7 deaths into one active case. These forensic links led investigators to an undercover operation at a biker bar in Volusia County, where Florida Highway Patrol and local deputies eventually made the arrest. The undeniable pattern of the 7 killings allowed the prosecution to lean into the serial killer label immediately, ensuring that any future defense would have to work against a public that had already accepted a specific narrative for the suspect. The focus then shifted to the courtroom, where the legal definitions of victim and perpetrator would be argued in a controlled, sterile environment. Wuornos's defense rested on the mechanics of self-defense. She provided detailed testimony alleging that the men she killed had subjected her to extreme physical violence and sexual assault. The state countered this by pointing to her actions after the shootings, specifically that she took the victims' cars and personal belongings, to argue that the killings were planned robberies rather than acts of survival. While the lawyers argued, another transaction was taking place. Key witnesses and even some members of law enforcement began negotiating the sale of movie and book rights before the trial had even reached a verdict. This financial interest fueled a relentless tabloid atmosphere, where the commercial value of the monster story often seemed to take precedence over the legal proceedings. The case highlights a recurring tension in the justice system, the difficulty of weighing evidence in a courtroom when the public has already bought into a pre-packaged version of the story. The legal outcome was decisive. The juries rejected her self-defense claims, and Wuornos was convicted across multiple trials, receiving 6 separate death sentences. The media circus continued for over a decade. When her execution finally took place in 2002, the news coverage remained as intense as it had been during her initial arrest. We are left with a contrast between the 7 lives lost and the entertainment value that the media extracted from the case for years. Her legacy asks us to consider the costs of that label. To what degree did the title of first female serial killer obscure the details of gender-based violence and the trauma Wuornos had experienced? Today, the case remains a study in how true crime stories are constructed for public consumption, often at the expense of the people involved. The story of Aileen Wuornos serves as a warning about the influence of sensationalism, leaving us to navigate the space between a criminal verdict and the public spectacle that surrounds it.